The church bells tolled, but they weren't for Jamie Carter. They never had been. Growing up in the small, conservative town of Willow Creek, Virginia, he'd watched his cousins, siblings, and even distant relatives walk down the aisle, their laughter echoing through family gatherings he was never asked to join. At 28, Jamie stood in the mirror of his cramped apartment, adjusting the black tie that felt like a noose around his heart. His reflection showed a man with kind hazel eyes, a jawline softened by years of quiet resilience, and a secret he'd carried since he was 16. He was gay, and his family had never forgiven him for it. The Carters, pillars of Willow Creek's Baptist community, had made it clear through silence, through absence, that Jamie's truth was a stain they'd rather erase. Today was different. Today, Jamie was getting married. To Ethan Hayes, the man who'd taught him that love wasn't a sin but a salvation. Their wedding, planned in secret, was set in a sprawling garden estate just outside town, a place where roses bloomed wild and fairy lights twinkled like stars. Jamie's hands trembled as he buttoned his jacket, not from fear of the vows, but from what he'd planned for the ceremony's end. A reckoning. A moment that would force his family to see him, truly see him, for the first time. Ethan knocked softly on the doorframe, his white suit crisp against his tanned skin, his green eyes warm with adoration. "You ready, love?" he asked, his voice steady where Jamie's heart raced. Jamie nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Ethan crossed the room, pulling him into a kiss that tasted of promise and defiance. They'd built this day together, against all odds, and Jamie's plan, his bold, impossible plan, would make it unforgettable. The garden was a vision of beauty, rows of chairs filled with friends who'd become their chosen family. But in the back, seated stiffly, were the Carters, his parents, his sister Lila, his uncle Ray. They'd come, not out of love, but obligation, their faces etched with discomfort. Jamie had invited them all, every last one, knowing they'd never done the same for him. He felt their eyes on him as he took his place at the altar, Ethan's hand anchoring him. The officiant began, but Jamie's mind was elsewhere, racing toward the moment he'd scripted in his heart. As the ceremony unfolded, memories flooded back. The family dinners where his chair was conspicuously empty. The whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room. The wedding invitations that never arrived. Each one a silent message: "You don't belong." But Ethan had changed everything. They'd met 3 years ago at a coffee shop in Richmond, where Ethan's easy laugh and fearless honesty had cracked open Jamie's guarded heart. Ethan, a photographer with a penchant for capturing raw emotion, had seen Jamie's pain and loved him through it. The vows came, and Jamie's voice shook as he spoke. "Ethan, you showed me I'm enough. You're my home, my fight, my forever." Ethan's eyes glistened, his own vows a quiet promise of unwavering devotion. The guests clapped, some wiping tears, but the Carters sat stone-faced, their silence louder than the applause. Jamie's chest tightened. He wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. The officiant pronounced them married, and the crowd erupted. Jamie and Ethan kissed, the world fading away for a moment. But Jamie's plan loomed. As the guests rose, expecting the usual reception, Jamie stepped forward, raising a hand. The murmurs died down. Ethan squeezed his shoulder. A silent "You've got this." Jamie's heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "Before we celebrate," he began, "I need to say something." He turned to his family, their eyes narrowing. "You never invited me. Not to a single wedding, baptism, or reunion. You shut me out because of who I am, who I love. But today, I invited you. And now, I'm going to show you what you've missed." He gestured to the screen behind the altar, where a projector flickered to life. Gasps rippled through the crowd as images appeared, photos of Jamie and Ethan's life together. laughing in a park, dancing in their kitchen, volunteering at a youth shelter for queer kids. Each frame was a testament to their love, their resilience. The final image showed Jamie at 16, alone in his room, writing a letter he'd never sent, begging his family to accept him. The words "I'm still your son" glowed on the screen. The Carters froze, their faces pale. Jamie's mother clutched her purse, her lips trembling. His father stared at the ground. Lila, his sister, looked away, tears brimming. The silence was deafening, but Jamie wasn't done. "This is who I am," he said, voice breaking but strong. "And I'm not invisible anymore." The guests were on their feet, clapping, some sobbing. Ethan pulled Jamie close, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." But the Carters remained seated, their discomfort a wall Jamie had finally breached. He didn't know if they'd change, but for the first time, he didn't need their approval. He had Ethan, their love, and the courage to stand in his truth. As the reception began, Jamie felt lighter, like a weight had lifted. The dance floor filled, music swelling, but his eyes kept drifting to his family. Would they stay? Would they speak? He didn't know. But he'd done what he came to do. He'd shown them his heart, and it was enough. The reception buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but Jamie's pulse still raced from his speech. The garden glowed under strings of fairy lights, tables laden with wildflowers and flickering candles. Ethan spun Jamie onto the dance floor, their first dance as husbands, set to a slow, soulful melody. Jamie rested his head on Ethan's shoulder, breathing in the moment, but his eyes darted to the Carters' table. They hadn't left, but they sat like statues, their faces unreadable. Ethan sensed his tension. "Hey," he murmured, tilting Jamie's chin up. "This is our night. Let them process." Jamie nodded, but the weight of their presence lingered. He wanted to believe they'd heard him, that the photos his life laid bare had cracked their armor. But years of rejection had taught him not to hope too hard. As the song ended, Lila approached, her heels clicking on the wooden dance floor. Jamie's heart skipped. His older sister, once his closest confidant, had drifted away after he came out, her silence cutting deeper than his parents' disapproval. She wore a navy dress, her auburn hair pulled tight, her eyes red-rimmed. "Jamie," she said softly, "can we talk?" Ethan gave Jamie's hand a reassuring squeeze before stepping away. Lila led him to a quiet corner of the garden, where fireflies blinked in the dusk. "I didn't know," she said, her voice thick. "Those pictures, your life, I didn't realize how much we hurt you." Jamie's throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, but the years of absence stung. "You could have asked," he said, sharper than he meant. "You could have called." Lila flinched. "I know. I was scared. Mom and Dad, they made it feel like loving you meant betraying them." She wiped her eyes. "But seeing you up there, so brave. I'm sorry. Jamie, I want to try." Her words were a lifeline, fragile but real. Jamie hugged her, tears spilling, the first crack in the wall between them. Back at the reception, Ethan was charming the guests, his laughter infectious. Jamie watched him, marveling at the man who'd chosen him despite the chaos of his family. But the moment of peace shattered when Uncle Ray approached, his face stern. Ray, the family patriarch, had always been the loudest in his disapproval, quoting scripture to justify his disdain. "You made your point," Ray said gruffly. "But this," he gestured to the wedding. "To Ethan, it's not right." Jamie's stomach twisted, but he stood taller. "What's not right is you deciding who I get to love." Ray's jaw tightened, but before he could retort, Ethan appeared, his arms sliding around Jamie's waist. "Problem, Ray." Ethan's tone was calm, but his eyes were steel. Ray muttered something, and walked away, leaving Jamie shaken but proud. Ethan kissed his temple. "You're doing great, love." The night wore on, filled with toasts and dancing. But Jamie's mind kept circling back to his family. His parents hadn't spoken, their silence a heavy presence. He wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but Ethan urged him to wait. "Give them time," he said. "You've already shaken their world." Jamie wasn't sure time would change them, but he trusted Ethan's optimism. As the guests thinned, Jamie and Ethan slipped away to a quiet bench under an oak tree. The stars were bright, the air cool. Ethan pulled Jamie close, their fingers intertwined. "You were incredible today," Ethan said. "You showed them who you are." Jamie smiled, but doubt lingered. Had he done enough? Would his family ever see him as more than a disappointment? The question hung unanswered as they returned to the reception, where a surprise awaited. Lila had gathered a few cousins once who'd never shunned Jamie outright, and they raised glasses in a toast. "To Jamie and Ethan," Lila said, her voice steady. "To love that fights." The words hit Jamie like a wave, and he clung to Ethan, tears falling. It wasn't his whole family, but it was a start. As the night ended, Jamie felt a shift. He'd spent years craving acceptance, but today, he'd claimed his own worth. The Carters might never fully understand, but he had Ethan, Lila's tentative olive branch, and a community that celebrated them. For now, that was enough. The morning after the wedding, Jamie woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of their Richmond loft. Ethan lay beside him, still sleeping, his chest rising and falling softly. Jamie traced the gold band on his finger, a quiet reminder that yesterday was real. But the weight of his family's reaction or lack thereof pressed on him. Lila's words had sparked hope, but his parents' silence felt like a fresh wound. Over coffee, Ethan sensed Jamie's mood. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" he asked, setting down his mug. Jamie nodded, staring into his cup. "I thought maybe they'd say something. Anything." Ethan reached across the table, his hand warm over Jamie's. "You gave them a lot to chew on. They might need time to catch up." Jamie wanted to believe him, but the years of rejection made optimism feel reckless. Still, he leaned into Ethan's touch, drawing strength from it. They spent the morning unpacking gifts and reading cards from friends, each one a reminder of the love that surrounded them. But a text from Lila interrupted the calm. "Can I come by? Need to talk." She arrived an hour later, her face a mix of determination and nerves. "I couldn't stop thinking about last night," she said, sitting on their worn leather couch. "Those pictures, Jamie, they broke my heart. I want to make this right." She pulled out a photo album, its pages filled with childhood snapshots, her and Jamie riding bikes, building forts, laughing at Christmas. "I kept these," she said. "I never stopped loving you." Jamie's eyes stung as he flipped through the album. Memories of a time before the divide flooded back. "Why didn't you fight for me?" he asked, voice raw. Lila's face crumpled. "I was weak. I let Mom and Dad's rules dictate everything. But I'm here now." She hesitated, then added, "I want you to come to my place next week. Just you and Ethan. A real family dinner." The invitation felt like a bridge, shaky but possible. Jamie agreed, though doubt gnawed at him. What if it was a gesture she couldn't sustain? Ethan, ever the optimist, saw it differently. "She's trying. Jamie, that's more than you got before." The week passed in a blur of honeymoon planning and quiet moments with Ethan. But Jamie's thoughts kept drifting to his parents. They hadn't called, hadn't texted. He wondered if his speech had pushed them further away. The night of Lila's dinner arrived, and Jamie's nerves were electric as they drove to her house in Willow Creek. The familiar streets felt both comforting and hostile, each corner tied to a memory of exclusion. Lila greeted them warmly, her husband Tom shaking Ethan's hand with genuine enthusiasm. The dinner was simple roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, but the effort was clear. Lila had set the table with care, even using their grandmother's old china. The conversation started light, skirting the heavy topics, but Jamie could feel the undercurrent of things unsaid. Halfway through dessert, Lila broached it. "I told Mom and Dad I was doing this," she said, her fork hovering. "They weren't happy, but I didn't care. I want you in my life. Jamie. Both of you." Jamie's chest tightened. It was more than he'd expected, but the mention of his parents stung. "Did they say anything about the wedding?" he asked, dreading the answer. Lila hesitated. "Mom said it was bold. Dad didn't say much, just that it wasn't his place to judge anymore. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't outright rejection either." Jamie clung to that sliver of ambiguity, hoping it might grow into something more. As they drove home, Ethan reached for Jamie's hand. "That was a start, right?" he said, his smile soft. Jamie nodded, but his heart was a tangle of hope and fear. Lila's effort was a step, but the rest of the Carters remained a wall he wasn't sure he could climb. Still, he had Ethan, and now Lila. Maybe that was enough to keep fighting. The weeks after Lila's dinner felt like walking a tightrope. Jamie oscillated between hope and caution, replaying her words, her promise to rebuild their bond. But the silence from his parents gnawed at him, a reminder of the chasm still between them. Ethan, ever steady, kept him grounded, filling their days with plans for a trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains, a belated honeymoon, to escape the weight of Willow Creek. One afternoon, while sorting through wedding photos, Jamie found a picture of his mother at the ceremony, her face caught in a rare moment of softness. It stirred something in him, a reckless urge to reach out. Against Ethan's gentle advice to wait, Jamie drove to his parents' house, the same brick colonial where he'd grown up, where every memory was tinged with rejection. His mother, Ellen, answered the door, her expression guarded. "Jamie," she said, stepping aside reluctantly. His father, Paul, sat in the living room, a newspaper in hand, barely glancing up. The air was thick with tension, but Jamie pressed forward. "I need to know," he said, voice steady despite his racing heart. "Did anything I said at the wedding mean anything to you?" Ellen's lips tightened, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion. "It was a lot," she admitted. "We raised you to follow certain values. Jamie." "This," she gestured vaguely, meaning his life. "His marriage, it's hard for us." Paul grunted, still not looking up. Jamie's chest ached, but he pushed on. "I'm your son. I love Ethan. That's not going to change. Can you at least try to see me?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Ellen spoke, her voice softer. "We're trying, Jamie. It's not easy." It wasn't the apology he craved, but it was more than he'd ever gotten. Paul said nothing, his silence louder than words. Jamie left, his heart a storm of frustration and faint hope. Back home, Ethan listened as Jamie recounted the visit, his face a mix of empathy and pride. "You're braver than anyone I know," he said, pulling Jamie into a hug. "They're moving, even if it's slow." Jamie wanted to believe him, but the weight of his father's silence lingered. Days later, an unexpected call came from Uncle Ray. Jamie braced himself for another lecture, but Ray's tone was different, gruff, but not hostile. "Your mother's been talking," he said. "She's struggling, but she's proud of you, in her way. Don't give up on her." The words stunned Jamie. Ray, the family's staunchest critic, offering a bridge. It felt surreal. Emboldened, Jamie and Ethan invited Lila and Tom to their loft for dinner. The evening was warm, filled with laughter and stories. A glimpse of the family Jamie had always wanted. Lila shared that she'd been talking to their cousins, urging them to rethink their stance on Jamie. Some were receptive, others hesitant, but the tide was shifting, however slowly. As the night ended, Lila pulled Jamie aside. "I found something," she said, handing him a letter. It was from their grandmother, written years ago, urging the family to love without judgment. "She'd have been proud of you," Lila said, tears in her eyes. Jamie clutched the letter, feeling a connection to a past he thought he'd lost. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jamie felt a spark of hope. His family might never fully embrace him, but cracks were forming in their walls. With Ethan by his side and Lila's support, he was building a new kind of family, one rooted in love, not conditions. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched before Jamie and Ethan, a tapestry of green and gold under a September sky. Their honeymoon cabin, nestled among pines, was a sanctuary from the world. For a week, they hiked trails, cooked over a fire, and lay under the stars, their laughter drowning out the echoes of Willow Creek. But even here, Jamie's thoughts drifted to his family, to the fragile progress with Lila and the stubborn silence of his parents. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan pulled out his camera, flipping through photos from the wedding. "Look at you," he said, showing Jamie a shot of himself at the altar, eyes bright with defiance. "You changed the game that day." Jamie smiled, but the memory of his parents' faces distant, unyielding stung. "I don't know if it was enough," he admitted. Ethan set the camera down, his expression serious. "It was enough for you. That's what matters." Back in Richmond, reality crept in. A letter arrived from Ellen, the first direct communication since the wedding. Jamie's hands shook as he opened it. Her words were careful, measured. "We're trying to understand, Jamie. It's not what we expected, but we don't want to lose you." No apology, no full acceptance, but a door cracked open. Jamie read it again and again, torn between hope and skepticism. He showed the letter to Lila during a coffee meetup. She read it, her face softening. "This is huge for Mom," she said. "She's never been good with words, but this is her reaching out." Jamie wasn't convinced, but Lila's optimism was infectious. She suggested a family meeting, not a confrontation, but a chance to talk. Jamie hesitated, but Ethan's encouragement pushed him to agree. The meeting took place at Lila's house, a neutral ground. Ellen and Paul sat across from Jamie and Ethan, the air thick with unspoken history. Lila mediated, her voice calm but firm. "We're here to listen," she said. Jamie spoke first, his words raw. "I just want to be your son again. Not a problem to fix." Ellen's eyes filled with tears, but Paul remained stoic, his hands folded tightly. Ellen spoke next, her voice trembling. "We were raised a certain way, Jamie. It's hard to unlearn. But seeing you with Ethan, it's not what I pictured, but it's real." Paul shifted, his jaw tight, but he nodded slightly. It wasn't a full embrace, but it was progress, a step toward something new. As they left, Ethan squeezed Jamie's hand. "They're trying," he said. Jamie nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The road was long, but for the first time, he believed it might lead somewhere. Back home, Jamie found himself reflecting on his journey. The boy who'd hidden his truth was gone, replaced by a man who'd fought for his place in the world. Ethan had been his anchor, Lila his bridge, and now, maybe, his parents were starting to see him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Months passed, and Jamie settled into a new rhythm. He and Ethan threw themselves into their life, together renovating their loft, volunteering at the youth shelter, planning a future that felt boundless. Lila became a regular presence. Her dinners a safe space where Jamie could be himself. But his parents remained distant, their efforts sporadic. A phone call here, a brief visit there, each one a fragile thread in a tapestry still unraveling. One day, an invitation arrived at a cousin's wedding in Willow Creek. Jamie stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. It was the first family wedding he'd been invited to in years. Ethan read the card over his shoulder, his grin wide. "They're coming around," he said. Jamie wasn't so sure, but the gesture felt like a milestone. At the wedding, Jamie and Ethan arrived hand in hand, drawing curious glances from relatives. Some offered warm smiles, others averted their eyes. But Ellen approached them, her expression tentative. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice soft. Paul lingered behind, offering a nod but no words. It was enough to keep Jamie's hope alive, though doubts lingered. The reception was lively, filled with music and laughter, but Jamie felt the weight of old wounds. He overheard a cousin whisper, "Didn't think they'd show," and it stung. Ethan, sensing his unease, pulled him onto the dance floor, their laughter drowning out the murmurs. "We belong here," Ethan whispered, and Jamie clung to that truth. Later, Ellen pulled Jamie aside. "I've been reading," she said, her voice low, "about people like you. I don't understand it all, but I'm trying." Her words, clumsy but sincere, hit Jamie hard. He hugged her, tears falling, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of the mother he'd lost. Back in Richmond, Jamie and Ethan reflected on the day. "It's not perfect," Jamie said, "but it's something." Ethan nodded, his eyes warm. "It's a lot. You're rewriting their story, Jamie." The words settled in Jamie's heart, a reminder that change, however slow, was possible. As winter approached, Lila proposed a family Christmas everyone, including Jamie and Ethan. The idea terrified Jamie, but he agreed, driven by the hope of rebuilding. The pieces of his family were coming together, not seamlessly, but enough to keep him fighting. Christmas Eve arrived, blanketing Willow Creek in a soft layer of snow. Lila's house glowed with warmth, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air. Jamie and Ethan arrived early, helping set up, their nerves masked by busy hands. The guest list was small: Lila, Tom, Ellen, Paul, and a few cousins who'd warmed to Jamie, but it felt monumental. A family gathering, with Jamie at the center, not the sidelines. The evening began awkwardly, conversation stilted. Paul's silence was a familiar weight, but Ellen made an effort, asking Ethan about his photography, complimenting Jamie's scarf. Small gestures, but they mattered. Lila kept the mood light, sharing stories of their childhood, carefully avoiding the painful years. After dinner, they gathered around the tree, exchanging gifts. Ellen handed Jamie a small box, her hands trembling. Inside was a photo frame, holding a picture of Jamie as a boy, smiling with his parents. "I want new memories," she said, her voice breaking. "With you and Ethan." Jamie's throat closed, tears spilling. He hugged her tightly, feeling a piece of his heart mend. Paul remained quiet, but as they left, he pulled Jamie aside. "I don't understand your life," he said gruffly, "but you're my son." It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a start. Jamie nodded, unable to speak, and Ethan's hand found his, grounding him. Back home, Jamie felt a shift. The boy who'd been invisible was now seen, not by everyone, but by enough. He and Ethan curled up on the couch, the Christmas lights casting a warm glow. "We're building something," Ethan said, kissing Jamie's forehead. "A family. Our way." Jamie smiled, believing it. The new year brought more steps forward. Lila organized family outings. Small, but meaningful. Some relatives softened. Others stayed distant. But Jamie focused on the progress. He and Ethan continued their work at the shelter, helping queer youth find their own strength. A mission that felt like an extension of their love. Jamie's heart was fuller than it had ever been. But he knew the journey wasn't over. His family's acceptance was fragile, a work in progress. But with Ethan by his side, he felt ready for whatever came next. Spring arrived, and with it, a sense of renewal. Jamie and Ethan's first anniversary loomed, a milestone that felt like a victory. They planned a quiet celebration, but Lila insisted on hosting a party, inviting the family members who'd begun to embrace them. The guest list was small, but it included Ellen, Lila, Tom, and a few cousins, a far cry from the isolation of years past. The party was held in Lila's backyard, fairy lights twinkling like echoes of their wedding. Jamie stood beside Ethan, watching their loved ones laugh and talk, a scene he'd once thought impossible. Ellen approached, her smile tentative but warm. "I'm proud of you, Jamie," she said, her words simple but seismic. Paul, standing nearby, offered a rare smile, a silent acknowledgement of change. As the evening wound down, Jamie took Ethan's hand, leading him to the center of the yard. "A year ago," he said, his voice carrying, "I stood up to my family and showed them who I am. Today, I want to thank you all for seeing me." He turned to Ethan, his eyes shining. "And you, for loving me through it all." The guests clapped, some tearing up. Lila raised a glass, her voice steady. "To Jamie and Ethan, who taught us what love really means." The toast was a balm, healing wounds Jamie had carried for years. Even Paul joined in, his glass raised, a quiet gesture of acceptance. Later, as they cleaned up, Lila pulled Jamie aside. "You changed us," she said. "Not just Mom and Dad, but all of us. You're the bravest person I know." Jamie hugged her, tears falling, feeling the weight of his journey lift. That night, alone with Ethan, Jamie reflected on the year. He'd faced his family's rejection, fought for his place, and found love that anchored him. The Carters weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that was enough. He looked at Ethan, his heart full. "We did it," he whispered. Ethan smiled, pulling him close. "We're just getting started." The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but with hope. Jamie had rewritten his story, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever felt invisible. His wedding had been the spark, his love the flame, and now, he was home,